Katherine and Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks you for having us.
I'm so glad you're here. I want to dive right in. 11 years ago, guys, your life changed forever. Take us back. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. So on April 21st, 2008, out of absolutely nowhere, I had a massive brainstem stroke and nearly died due to a tiny birth defect I had in my brain that grew and grew and then ruptured when I was 26, causing an extreme, terrible stroke and leaving me severely disabled. And I am currently unable to walk on my own. I use a wheelchair and I can't drive a car. And obviously my face is paralyzed on one side, and I have a hand that doesn't work, and just a number of really intense health problems. And I had a 6-month-old baby at the time, and Jay was in law school, and life was pretty sweet and carefree as young newlywed-ish parents, and then everything changed in an instant.
Were there any neurological symptoms that tipped their hat to this potentially happening, or did it just happen out of the blue? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, none whatsoever. My whole life. Now, of course, in retrospect, you can see how maybe that funny dizzy spell or maybe that time I passed out were connected. But no medical history, no family history, no history of any kind, nothing.
I think that's a good question, though, because it is, again, sometimes only in retrospect when you can put some pieces together with your story. And I think to help listeners possibly, we've had quite a few people, of course, tons of people who've had stroke and brain injury and things reach out. Quite a few people who've had some similar precursor symptoms. Katherine was diagnosed with vertigo in college, which, you're dizzy and it's an inner ear issue, and, probably not going to go and get an expensive MRI,
right,
because you're perfectly healthy. If they would have found the condition. That's a whole nother story, though, because then you would have to choose to sort of operate and have a lot of these same deficits. Yeah. So in a way, it was a worst case scenario in a lot of ways, but it was, at least you don't have sort of that, guilt or whatever of like, I had to choose to do this or not.
Right.
But I don't know. I think it's worth noting that, if you've got some weird dizziness, fainting, whatever, like it's worth getting checked out in a little bit of a deeper way. And even if you're perfectly healthy, that's kind of, what we more lean into, and this reality of the world we live in, and the physical world we live in, and the bodies we live in. There's just not a whole lot of things we can promise for sure are going to turn out how we thought they would. And, we don't have to be afraid still.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really interested, Jay, because I grew up in a household with a mom who had a terminal illness. And I watched as my parents raised us in that environment. And so I want to kind of drill down on your identity as a man, Katherine, your identity as a woman, because stuff like this can really shake us to the core. And so, Jay, I'd love to just start with you. As Katherine's husband, what were some of your go-to coping mechanisms for this trauma?
Yeah, I think the first experience of trauma, usually, especially one that's so out of the blue, is this sort of survival mode for a long time. And so I think most of the experience of the trauma was just reactionary and trying to survive and trying to get to the next day to make the next right choice. It took a few years until the reality really settled in. And I think even within that, there's a lot of negative coping mechanisms. Again, you're kind of just hit with this real weighty reality and the future of a life that looks totally different. I didn't have the stroke, but I might as well have, really, for how it's impacted my life and my kids too. So, this systemic reality of this totally different course that our life took hit pretty hard in certain seasons. I think it's cool because I feel like I've been wired to take a lot of stress, but also sometimes then if you are wired that way, you don't listen when you really are stressed. You know what I mean? You're kind of like, I think I got this. And we had a lot of family and community around us to help too. But I think it's taken me quite a while to just figure out what I need as a caregiver, what I need simultaneously as a parent and as really a startup runner of a business. And those rhythms look a lot like finding space for myself. I'm pretty introverted, really, at the core. I'm I guess, extrovert to introvert. And I need some time just to myself. I need to find those rhythms where I can get away. I need to force myself to do, physical activity and be out of nature and some of those things. But it took a really long time to get to that place. And it wasn't even out of pride. It was just more like I have a high capacity for stress, and I didn't realize just how stressed I still was, even though I felt like I could keep powering through.
Yeah, Katherine, how about you?
Do you want to ask me the question exactly again?
Yeah, sure. Sure. So at 26, you're newly married, young married. You have a 6-month-old home. This happens. Your identity potentially is rocked as a woman, as a mom, as a wife, as a caregiver, as a provider. What happened from the inside out?
I think there was fairly early on, after kind of waking up and wrestling with this just whole new life, there was a deep sense that God had made a mistake and forgotten me, and a real hopelessness probably. But thankfully it wasn't somewhere I stayed, actually. It was more of a feeling, and then very quickly in the journey, a very bizarre feeling of being chosen. And that hasn't left almost 12 years later. I still feel this just crazy feeling of God really has something very special in store for the world through my life. And that is this just crazy fueling thing. I mean, it's hard to even put words around, but like I very specifically have multiple moments, actually. Definitely one early on, definitive, stay on this earth kind of moment, but many subsequent of seeing like, oh, God knew what he was doing all along, and I can trust and live into that, even if I don't understand this.
It's really interesting, Katherine. You said, and I would suppose a lot of people watching us on YouTube, listening on the podcast right now, would resonate with the same thing you said. So maybe they experienced infertility or the diagnosis of a devastating illness, the loss of a family member, whatever. And the reaction is, Lord, you don't see me, you don't know me, you forgot me.
Yeah.
What was the modulation inside your spirit and soul? Because, and this is what I want to drill down into the conversation with you both further, is that I think what happens when we have adverse circumstances like you experienced, it can easily break the spirit. And then the broken spirit creates the lens through which we look and say, I'm alone, I have to self-protect. Because obviously he doesn't see me, he doesn't know me. But I want to stay right there for a moment, Katherine, and ask you, what was the modulation? Because I don't know too many people who would be able to pivot out of that in the way you did. Maybe it wasn't quick. I'd love to hear more.
Well, no, it definitely wasn't quick in one sentence. I mean, here I am 12 years later talking about it. It's not like I got out of bed from the stroke and thought, okay, game on. But there for sure was an army lifting me up, a family of friends, and deep community that was walking me through this nightmare and fueling me. So I think that was a huge part of it. Also, telling my story actually to an online community, which this was long before social media really got kicking. In 2008, it was on Caring Bridge, a website that people would check for medical updates. And somehow that like sharing with the world made me almost want to represent my faith in a way that made me want to live into a better story. It was this bizarre, like, I want to give God the glory in this. And so I get to choose now how this is. I don't even know what I mean exactly, like how I move forward. And it wasn't some weird like performance or something thing in the least. It was super authentic, but it was this deep. I had walked with the Lord my whole life, and really wrestled in that season early on after the stroke with what was God doing in this nightmare. I mean,
Right.
how could I cope in this life? And there almost being this shift fairly early on, about 6 months after, where I felt like this was such an opportunity for me to steward this story really well, and I really wanted to. And I'm sure there was a lot of selfish motivation in that. Like I'm, and there's probably a deep, weird perfectionism thing too, and all the issues abound. Not perfect, but there was a deep desire to to honor Christ in this messed up story. And in doing that, it made it okay for me. I wasn't concerned that I wasn't going to do X, Y, and Z again, because I was going to do something very different and unique, possibly very exciting with my life that looks nothing like what it did before. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, Katherine, it does. And I've got so much respect for both of you, because it seems like there's this rise up that happened in you. But that dark night of the soul moment happens for a lot of us. I mean, did you ever say, God, what happened? I mean, did you feel deeply betrayed,
Yeah.
right? I want to drill down on the disposition of your soul, a bleeding heart, if you will, to say, Father, where are you? Because I just need you to heal this broken heart. Like, what was that like?
There was a very clear moment in November of 2008, and I had just failed my 9th swallowing test. And, we didn't know if I'd ever eat again. And I could not walk, and nothing on my body was working at all. And I ended up at a place where I began to think that God made a mistake by leaving me on earth, and it would be better if I were gone, that I'm caught between life and death, and that this could not be what God intended for my story. And that, I mean, if God was even real, which who knows at this point, it's like he's forgotten me. He turned his back, and this has happened. And right as those thoughts all really landed on me, I wanted to really live into that. Like I wanted like that to be the truth, the ultimate real truth. And it was just, I've never had like some weird supernatural thing. Not weird. I've never had like a supernatural moment where I hear God's voice or something. But the deep awakening of the Word of God that I'd known much of, which was from when I was little, I'm not kidding, brought me to a deep, almost audible from my head voice of God saying, Katherine, you are not a mistake, because I don't make mistakes. I know better than you know. I see the full picture of this. Like somehow I'm at work, I'm God, you're not, hold on. And ultimately, honestly, I've chosen you. Like Ephesians 4:1, live a life worthy of the special calling you received. There was this crazy, like, don't you see, can't you see, on the other side here, in the upside down kingdom of God, this is actually not crazy town. That what is happening here is part of a perfect plan for your story. And you can go with that. And I was able to. And that was really the closest I came to thinking I could not do this. And I pray that feeling never leaves. It hasn't yet. It's been almost 12 years of feeling very chosen by God to walk through this, and very much like I really am stewarding something very special during my very short time on earth. And I don't know, it makes me, I don't know the word exactly, like I just sit up a little higher in my wheelchair knowing that I've got like this special gig going, you know? Like it's so crazy to say, but like I consider my wheelchair a seat of honor, in fact, because I feel like I'm chosen for this. And this is a very special calling. And that sounds crazy if we weren't living for a different world.
Living for a different world. Jay, step into this a little bit, because as her husband, I don't know any husband that wouldn't say, I'd take this from you today, but your wife is talking about this platform, this call, this deep willingness to embrace today as it is. What happens inside your soul? What happens inside your emotions as her husband, as a man? Do you feel like your hands are tied?
Yeah, I think the whole modulation, which I think that's a really great word, and I love that. Sort of the metaphor that creates of this shift. I think about, you modulate in music or something, and it still can be a really beautiful sort of change, but it's a totally different set of notes, and I think that holds so true, that picture. And for us, I mean, again, husband, very stereotypically, and in our case too, you want to fix it. You want to shoulder the heaviest burden for people you love, and again, you often bear the weight of that expectation on your own heart and soul, that you have something to offer that's going to change this story. Sure. And it doesn't take a whole lot of living to realize that's not really available. Even if you really want that, you can't always change it. You can't pray it away or throw money at it or solve it with the most competent skills and intelligence necessarily. And what do you do with that? And that leaves us at a place of, call it rock bottom or call it just the end of ourself. And it really does leave you at this crossroads of either being completely embittered and broken down and afraid, or it can leave you in a posture of openness and opening your hands. And I think when I think about these modulations, there were certain milestones of those, or big noticeable moments, but there has been a series of modulations. And I think that's the key when we experience trauma too, is to get to a place after grief and loss and processing and acknowledging the hurts and the brokenheartedness to say, and now I'm ready to open my hands. I don't know what's next. I might get hurt again too, is the reality. But I'm going to open my hands from trying to control this, from trying to, will a different reality. But maybe I can actually lean into the reality that is this story right in front of me. Maybe the miracle that I've been praying for in a certain outcome, I'm missing the miracle that's right in front of me. And I think that mindset shift takes not only some time, but it takes practice, because you can witness that miracle right in front of you, and then a couple weeks later just have forgotten almost that it even occurred, because you're so looking ahead to the next thing that is not available yet, or maybe is available ever. And so I think that rhythm of being open-handed, we in just our faith experience too, that creates this opportunity to experience more of God. So you're opening your hands from things that you really think you're supposed to hold on to tightly, but realize through suffering that they were never the things you were supposed to hold on to that tightly to begin with, or that you were supposed to control, or that you were supposed to bear the full weight of. Like, that wasn't for us to do. And so we open our hands from it and receive really a greater dependency on God in the midst of that. But I think that the other sort of flip side of the coin is open your hands, but also still show up with your whole heart. Because I think open-handedness can make us almost be like, well, look, I'm resigned to this fate. Who cares? But then the reality of modulation over time is that in that tension, you find God to show up as he has before, and as he will continue to show up. Yeah. And that creates this kind of transcendent hope that propels you into the unknown. future and into the next modulation where you're having to reorient, where you're having to dream a new dream in a new season. And so that's kind of been the rhythm, I think, over these 12 years, and one that we want to continue to lean into. And yet it's not like, you just are evolved to some higher consciousness or something through this. It's still like, it feels like sometimes you're starting over at step one. And yet to know that that's okay. This is part of the human experience of wrestling with the divine, wrestling with our own humanity and the fragility and the beauty of it at the same time.
I'm really curious because I believe in some way you mentioned bitterness, and I think we've got to stay there because I think a lot of people listening who have gone through very difficult, dare I say, traumatic circumstances, maybe unknowingly dealing with bitterness. Bitterness plays into post-traumatic stress. I'd love to know today, how do you, number one, how have you coped with bitterness and post-traumatic stress? And then secondly, today, how do you recognize and cope with the seeds of bitterness, and even when post-traumatic stress manifests in your life today? Walk us through that.
Yeah. You want to jump in?
Sure. One of the greatest ways I've combated bitterness for sure is recognizing that I am far too blessed to be bitter. As cheesy as that sounds, it's kind of a big thing with me that I love, is that I'm too blessed to be bitter. It is hard to forget, and I like it. And that's been a huge mantra of mine for many years post-stroke, is that, yes, some things are definitely not ideal, for sure. But I mean, perspective is so important. Gratitude is so important. I am so insanely blessed. And that can be the big narrative or the small narrative of our stories, that it is so good. And there is hard stuff for sure. It's not denial, but it's hanging out at the blessings and recognizing, like, I love my life, and it is lived in a wheelchair. And that's crazy, except I really do. I'm so grateful. And I think it's because I stay at a place very intentionally of just waking up and recognizing how good my life is. And I think that speaks to a deep need for all of us to redefine what good actually means. Doesn't mean that everything is always easy or everything feels good, but true goodness is recognizing that God is in your story, has never left or abandoned you, and is taking care of you every day in every way. And all you have to do is look back to recognize, like, all the great stuff in your story, even if there's really hard stuff. And hone in on the great stuff and recognizing that what did not happen to me, for instance, is some deep gratitude. It's a blessing that I'm here, that I didn't die. Like, let's start there.
And I think in that perspective journey, you have to engage the hard story. Sometimes when we go through hard stories ourselves, the last thing we want is a hard story. And to encounter other people's pain, because it might be triggering. It might remind us of what we've been through and the wounding that we've experienced. And I think, again, this is not sadistic or something. And obviously we need levity. We need to find delight and wonder and humor and I mean, lean into the goodness. But we also don't need to be scared of going back to the places of our own wounding in order to help other people find healing there. And I think so often, bitterness comes as a byproduct of our own isolation, our own myopic view of our life and our hurts, that this is the worst thing that ever happened. How could this have happened? I can't believe this happened. More bad things are going to happen. Instead of saying, you know what? Yeah, camping out at the possibility of, well, hey, there could have even been worse things, and they haven't. And why has God left me here? And maybe there's something that I need to find and learn and cherish from this dark season and place. And then with that, to know that maybe there's some thing that I have to offer to somebody else going through that. We call it hoping it forward. And Paul talks about it in Corinthians, that you've been given comfort, not just so you can be comfortable. And I think even in our own comfort, we can get bitter, because then we reach that milestone of comfort or whatever, and then it's not enough because we're still sad. And so then we why didn't we get more comfort or whatever? So
Right.
the paradoxical beauty of, I think, the gospel in general, but and it's so healing from a psychological level, is to say I've been given something that I don't need to just keep to myself. I need to give it away. And in the giving away, somebody can start their healing journey, and I actually find something that is quintessential to my own healing. So it's, the scarcity mentality keeps us holding it all in, keeps us bitter, keeps us self-focused, but rather sort of that, I think I can go back to those places that are really hard in my story, to tell other people that this suffering is not the end of their own story.
That's good, Jay.
And to us, that has unwound a lot of the hurts and almost that micro crystallization, we call it, of a heart that gets hard and bitter to the world and to other people. And it's so natural for any of us to experience that. I mean, in our physical heart, that's the same way. It's not just like all of a sudden you have, arteries that clog. It's like a series of hardening. Yeah. And I think over time, that's how our, figurative hearts work too, that we're hurt and we kind of keep telling ourselves this victim story, and it just gets hard. And then we don't care to look outside of ourselves anymore. And we miss out on so much that we have gained, that we have to offer a world who is in need of somebody else to tell them that there's hope.
So what is hope then? The reason I ask is because I know hope is such a pivotal word for you too in your ministry. Yeah. But I think you look at culture, and even, as we're recording this, the World Health Organization has labeled the coronavirus this pandemic. And in fact, this morning I was out at the store and I can't find toilet paper. Everyone's buying all their toilet paper.
Yeah.
Right? In life, I think it's easy to say, well, I won't get my hopes up so that if this doesn't happen, I won't be as disappointed. And I think we ascribe this surface level definition to hope, but instead, like Hebrews 6 talks about hope, the anchor of the soul. It is the joyful expectation of good.
Right.
Jay, what I heard you just say in that moment is hope is the through line that enables and empowers us to walk through bitterness, to not self-protect, to not insulate the heart. Talk about hope.
Yeah.
What's hope been like for you?
I think for us, this idea of hope is something that has been a definition more modernly that has little weight to it and little transcendent definition in terms of even how it's used in the Bible, and how in Hebrews, as you referenced, this anchor of our soul is not really what we would find in the way we talk about hope today, which is really more just this expectation, really, and it's emotion driven sometime. And it's again, kind of myopic. And I think for us, hope in the sense of the hope that can transcend every storm, the hope that can go before us and make a way for us through this unknown future. This hope is a person, for one thing. We believe Jesus. That hope is believing in advance what only makes sense in reverse.
Yeah.
And just that sort of, that, again, holding this tension, this longing that is really deep in us that we know is going to be met someday, but really can only be met in one way, which is through God coming to us, God, in this sense, making all these horrible, sad realities and storms around us untrue in a future time, but in a way that we can actually live with confidence in right now. Not revising the past, not denying the reality of the sad and horrible and broken and tragic things, but also finding there to be this transcendent beauty and reality that we don't have to despair, even when it looks like that's the only story that's surrounding us. And so I love to lean into that, that picture. And I love the idea too, that one day we won't need to hope anymore because we'll be face to face with hope in Christ. And so we all will long for that day expectantly. But until then, we can really lean into a hope that has much more sort of guttural, just sort of gravitas to it than maybe the way we normally think about it.
Yeah.
Katherine, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, goodness. Well, very personally for me, hope in heaven has been extremely significant, that what's happening on earth is not the end of my story has been very, very powerful. The hope is that this isn't it. And since it's not, I can live differently because suffering isn't the end of the story. That God's got a good story in my life happening. And one day the story's got, I don't even know how to say it, a much better version in heaven. And the hope is of that day, no matter how bad things are.
And I do think the beauty of that is it makes you want to live more alive right now instead of sort of this, it's all burning down and whatever, and one day in heaven it won't be or whatever. Like that can be true, but I think heaven is here too, and I think that's part of what we get to do as people who are people of hope, as people who understand this story and believe it and are trying to live it out, is to be these witnesses of this reality to other people who are standing on the precipice of despair in the world. Because that is that's a pretty hard reality to face. If you think this is it was short, I had my shot and it didn't work out like I thought it did, and what's the point? And I mean, that's a recipe for despair. It just is, of course. And I think what a gift to have something that is fueling us now, even as we wait for this not yet experience. But I think, again, it's kind of a sad fact that most believers, I think, live in this bad mood and live with this sort of, or worse, just like, eyes are closed to what's right in front of us. And so I think, just to have this sort of joy that is irrepressible and that is supernatural is what we get to tap into. And that's part of us having hope. It should have some fruits of the Spirit, including things like joy, including things like not being afraid, and peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's the list. I think that's the hope of a life in Christ, which is a life in hope, is the fruits of a spirit that are not, that kind of look like, wait, why would they have all those things?
Right.
Their life looks pretty messed up, looks pretty hopeless, and yet they have joy. There's something that is good that I sense coming out of that life and that story, and I want to know more about it.
Right.
So that's what we're about living into and calling out in other people too.
That's good. I'd love to ask you both about shame. I'm fascinated by shame, and I do a lot of research in that space of fear and shame and how it affects us as men and women. So I'd love to ask the question to each of you individually, and I want to start, Katherine, with you perhaps.
Yeah.
How does shame manifest in your life as a woman today?
Oh, wow. Well, I have recently in our new book talked a lot about that true beauty is in fact walking away from shame, which is pretty powerful of a thought, but so accurate. That so much of the story that we internalize about our appearance is about the shame we feel from things people have said, things we've received, and maybe somebody didn't say it. Maybe we just thought it and took it to heart and feel shame about it. And so much of our beauty story, tragically, is about the shame that we feel, and uncovering true beauty is about walking away from that. In terms of my daily struggle with overcoming so much shame in my story, I'm fascinated you asked that, because it's never a question I've really been asked before, but it's so on the tip of my tongue that as a Southern Christian female, I have felt shame over so many things that had nothing to do with me even. I mean, radical shame at being who I am. It's really, really messed up. And I don't really have a great, go-to beat the shame something to tell you. But just honestly, I can say it is soul-wrecking tool of the enemy to come in and basically tell you you are unworthy, unqualified, you have no place at any table you are like made to sit at. You don't belong. No one likes you. Everyone just thinks you're terrible, honestly. And like that's a perfectly normal emotion for plenty of people. I dare say maybe higher in certain pockets, like Southern Christian women who think like everyone just assumes that I'm terrible. And like, why? Why do you feel that way, Catherine?
Wow.
Why do you assume everyone is like doesn't like you? Like, what's that about? And I think there's just a lot of messed up shame from so many things in our stories. And the freedom I have found from shame has been really transforming my mind, which is what it has taken. A totally different outlook on who God says I am, and just camping out there. That has nothing to do with the shame story. That has nothing to do with the ounce of shame. That there's nothing I could ever do or not do that will disqualify me from him. That there is absolutely nothing needed or not needed. I've dealt with feelings my entire life, both before and after my stroke. Like I cannot measure up. I'm never enough. But then at the same time, in the same moment, I'm too much, and I'm too loud. I'm too dramatic.
Wow.
I'm too sensitive, but I'm too insensitive, and I can't ever hit it right. And that is just debilitating. And the truth in Jesus is that we are everything. We're the prize he died for. And it's literally the opposite of the lie we believe about who we are.
What does that look like from a daily rhythm perspective, Katherine? Because I would suspect that there are moments in life that everyday circumstances and even facing the reality of everyday life validates perhaps the believed lie or the potential for the believed lie, and then potentially invalidates the truth of what God says over your life. So how do you combat that? You wake up, you have this thought of fear, shame, guilt, or you perhaps are in a conversation, or you see someone's nonverbal communication and you see their facial expression toward you. How do you combat that, like on the spot?
Oh goodness, good question. What has been a huge blessing in my journey to throwing off some of the shame has been my situation. The fact that my face is paralyzed has actually really freed me from a lot of beauty stuff, because I'm never going to love what I see in the mirror, and that is so like freeing. It's the ultimate irony is like, okay, your face is paralyzed. So somehow I'm not as worried about the way the blush sits on my cheek anymore. It's really crazy. The same is true in many areas of life, that when you can't sort of compete with yourself or some stupid thing, you don't feel like you have to strive. You don't have to try as hard. And it's really strangely freeing to sit in a wheelchair. Yeah, it's this bizarre, like I don't have to try so hard for whatever it is. And there's freedom in that from shame.
That whole like self-forgetfulness that, again, it's really having this confidence that you are enough. And yet since you are enough, you don't have to worry about you're enough so much. It's not the whole body activity or positivity. It's just more neutrality. Like these are good things. They can be taken in a way that is unhealthy and shame-inducing. So let's just not focus so much on them. And again, outward looking, not to the detriment of your own self-care and your own self-awareness and health, but like looking outside of ourselves is such a huge opportunity, I think, to throw off that shame. And to answer your question from Katherine, to me, I think, I'm, just to be straight up, I'm a white male, and there's just so much less shame baggage. And it's unfortunate. I even tell Katherine, like, harness the self-confidence of a mediocre white male, And like you'd be like halfway, I mean, it sounds kind of harsh, but like,
I'm that.
Like, it's just tragic that, unbelievable, incredible women in the world are so doubtful of what they have to offer compared to, just like,
don't say anything.
Dudes that are really
not that great.
Yeah, not that great. Who like think they're pretty sexy and awesome and can rule the world. It's just interesting how even that kind of environment, leads us to where we are today. And if that is the case, then what are we to do with it? Especially males who have sort of this leg up without quite so much inherent baggage. What am I to do with that? And so, and in our marriage, it's complicated. We have, caregiver dynamics, patient, we work together, our own marriage stuff, and yet I think I have this role to play where I can help Katherine unwind some of those lies of shame. I can't do that work fully. That's not, that again is putting that expectation, that weight of myself, something I can't do. Only God can do that in her life. And yet I can also be about unwinding some of the shame that I have, which is funny. I'm also, if you know some of the Enneagram 8,
for sure.
which is the
you're an 8. Okay.
Yeah. So
scary, huh?
So it's not scary. It just is. Hitler also was one, but that's unfortunate. And some other people. There were some healthy ones too, I think. But it's also I'm an attorney by training, and I'm an advocate in my life, and advocate now not just for my wife, but other people with disabilities. So there's this challenge to the status quo, and so that kind of, I don't know, makes me not feel like I need to apologize for much, which is interesting. And yet I think, again, kind of to like that experience of the PTSD. Sometimes if you have a high capacity for self-confidence or for stress, you don't realize that you are still stressed. You don't realize that you still have shame. It's just deeper down, and it takes something to crack that open. It takes maybe more of a significant crisis almost to really get you to the end of yourself. And the problem is when you get there, you don't have a whole lot of resources because you haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about it, So I think that's more where I found myself. And I think that practice of more of that radical, if you could call this radical confession, of that being known opportunity that we have. I'm good at kind of charging forward and knowing the right things to say. And, even in our own marriage, just how do we fully know each other and find ourselves still to be fully loved? And that's the great fear, I think, of most of us, is that if we are fully known, we'll be left and we'll be abandoned and we won't be loved. And I think if the gospel is that we are known fully in all of our worst ways, and yet we are still fully loved and the beloved, that we should get to embody that to each other and to ourselves as well. Again, this is divine work, supernatural work. It's impossible for us to do it on our own, but that, I think, is the way forward, to be known and to be loved, to know and to love each other. That reciprocity, that is the way forward. And yet it's a lot easier to say than to do. And in marriage and in relationships in the world, this is, I think this is the work that we're called to.
To be fully known, to be fully loved. Is that how you stayed faithful to one another? Here's what I mean. I know a lot of couples, 2 in particular, personally, who have experienced early trauma in their marriage. They didn't stay married because they're like, this is too much, right? I experienced it in my own life. Now, my mom remarried my stepfather. My mom was diagnosed with incurable cancer 18 months after they got married. He could have left. He could have been like, this is too much. How'd you guys do it? Because I don't see it happen a lot, and I admire you two. And I think it could be part of being fully known, fully loved. And that's kind of what triggered the question. But I'd love to hear from you. Like, how do you do it? How did you do it?
That is a good question. And I don't know that we fully have the answer. But as I don't know, there was a deep sense in both of us, actually, not just the caregiver, which could be wrongly assumed that the caregiver is the only one who gets an opinion and gets a vote in life because they're caregiving. No, the care receiver is us too, obviously.
Yes.
I would say there was a part of this crisis where we ended up on the same team, and that is so critical in marriage, that you're fighting the stroke and the disability of the stroke, not fighting each other. We're on the same side of the issue, and people can put the issue between them, and they're fighting with something really, really tough, and they're only seeing their spouse on the other side of it. And so it's almost like Jay and I were in this together, and we were able to, after a few years of living like this, get our head around, like, we're a team in this. It probably took a few years of you taking care of me for me to sort of catch up to that. But
I think that shared enemy angle is very powerful. I mean, you see it in war, you see it in tribalism, even in a negative degree, that we're together, and that's connecting us because we are against this other thing that is a force against us. And I think and like in a lot of ways, like that was almost the stroke, and that was earlier on, is that we have this shared fight. And I think in a way that was maybe the beginning, and so it was not naivete, but like that was that initial season that we were fighting something together. And then when you realize, wow, this season may be the rest of our lives season, and sort of the initial shock wears off, you then have to decide now whether you're going to shift from this common enemy to this common work together. And that's a big shift, because it's not as visceral or something. It's not as guttural of like, it's almost like fight or flight. So what's interesting is like the amygdala in the brain is what sort of, in then almost the deepest sense, am I going to fight or am I going to fly away from this issue, right? And so I think in a way, the initial trauma for us, there was the amygdala triggered, like, we're going to just fight it out together. Then you realize when the dust settles, like, and now what? Because you fought this thing, and now here's a new reality. And are you going to actually do the opposite? So your amygdala can be shrunk actually over practicing staying.
Yes.
Right. And so I think that's, I'm not sure if I've ever articulated it quite this way, but there was a shift to then saying, now we're going to stay and do work that's not against an enemy, but it is of building something new together. And yet we're going to have to shrink that amygdala that has actually been probably expanded in this fight season. And we're actually going to have to try to make it grow smaller to not fight each other inadvertently or fly away from each other. So maybe that's opening up some, I don't know, new thought process of mine. And for other people who've gone through trauma, is that it is required to fight or flight really initially, but then the real hard work is to do almost the opposite and just shift into this staying mode. And I think a lot of that is in every marriage, really, in every relationship.
For sure.
Realizing this isn't what I signed up for, and it doesn't have to be a medical catastrophe for people to have that experience of rolling over, not knowing exactly who you've committed your life to, and years down the road, or the kids are here, or the kids have gone out of the house, and now like I don't even know you anymore. And so that work, again, is this opportunity to stay, and this opportunity to learn to love somebody new, and to have them learn to love you. And it's this reciprocal thing. I mean, again, I'm very different of a person than I was before this all happened.
I am too,
So is Katherine. And we both had to say, like, are we willing to learn to love somebody new? Are we willing to have this modulation in our relationship to sing a different song together? And it can still be really beautiful, even if it's not what we signed up for on our wedding day exactly. And I think so much of that cultural story too is, it's deep, and we're hearing that message all around. If it's not like, if this person is not helping you fulfill what is your purpose on this earth as an individual, then you have every right to move on to something else or somebody else, or freedom from that. And I think, for us to have somebody say, again, in this very gospel sense of I fully know you and I fully love you, to have somebody vow that I'm going to stay for worse, for sicker, in poverty,
till the end are really the words of Christ to us. Like, no matter if none of it works out, no matter if you want to go, like, I'm not going anywhere. And again, this is the opportunity we have to imperfectly embody what we've been given by God. And, that's what I think with our marriage. There's been plenty of stuff that has nothing to do with the stroke that has been, really, really hard. And what's really powerful, though, even in our new book, Suffer Strong, which, it comes out of a lot of the lessons we've learned after everything changed, after we were redefined and upended in this very unexpected way. And yet a lot of this redefining lens now that we've put on our life, this not bitterness lens, but rather this upside down kingdom lens, it informs all the struggles. They don't have to be some huge suffering struggle. It can be something as, innocuous as just an unmet expectation, or struggle in with our kids, or, something that didn't work out in our work. Like, it still applies, because really this struggle in marriage or in life is about our expectations versus our reality. And I thought it was going to be this way, and actually now it's this way, and I'm disenchanted, and I'm stressed, and I'm afraid, and this is not what I want. And so I think if we can move those expectations closer to our reality, also expect more of God than just a person who we're putting sort of in this God position in our life, even if they're really, a great person, a very godly person. But, to shift that expectation, like I need to expect that God's going to do something more in my life, that I'm going to understand him more, than that my spouse is going to fulfill all of these things that I have and desires and these needs. So that's, I think, been part of the conversation that's evolved over all these years. And we also, we're both strong-willed firstborns.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
So,
Me too.
it's a real work. It's a real sweet miracle, I think, that we're still here.
Seriously.
And I
Powerful.
think, there's more for us to do together.
Yeah. What are you guys dreaming about today?
Ooh, good question. One of the big dreams of my heart for maybe way down the road, I have no idea, is we currently have this incredible camp for families with disabilities in Northwest Alabama, where we rent a campground for 2 weeks and have families from all over the country come, where someone is disabled and the whole family comes. And it's actually 800 people over the 2 weeks are there, and it is absolutely incredible, magical, just bizarrely enchanting when you gather a large group of disabled people. It's really incredible. And my dream long term would be to have our own facility where we don't have to rent it and just it's ours, and we have even more folks come and really be refreshed in their hard stories and have a week of just celebrating the lives that they do have and not things that they don't have or aren't able to do. So that's my
awesome.
dream.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think it's cool. Yeah, we get to dream some of these together, and certainly dreams that we never saw coming, but I think I'm dreaming a little bit of, finding a rest and a respite, even as a family. I think we go really hard. We do a lot of traveling, and we do a lot of stuff in the digital age too, which I think is amazing, especially for people with disabilities, like to leverage technology to connect.
Yes.
Yet, there's no substitute for in person, so we lean into that a lot too. And we're just trying to find sort of that season of just renewing and respite. Again, at the same token, knowing that life is short and we feel like we're here for a season and we want to make the most of it. So I don't know, dreaming of a literal rest maybe, and figurative rest for the soul too. And so much of that happens again in giving yourself away and in leaning into these hard stories. So our camp and our community and our advocacy for people with disabilities is rest for our soul too, which is incredible.
Yeah.
That's
Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Katherine and Jay, is there a question you wish more people asked you?
Yes, there's several. One is, did you biologically give birth to your child that is now 4 years old. People just assume that our little toddler John, who's 4, was adopted because I'm in a wheelchair and had a stroke 12 years ago. And he wasn't. After getting medical, like check off the it's okay list, I became pregnant and had a baby.
Wow.
In the summer of 2015. Thank you. And John is just the biggest blessing. John Nestor is his name, and Nestor was my neurosurgeon's name. And John Nestor is just a deep, deep blessing in our lives and in our story. And I think I wish people would ask, like, wait, is that your biological child? And he is, yes, is the answer.
Beautiful. That's really that's really beautiful. I have just loved our time together. I interviewed Chris and Emily Norton last summer. And I
their book.
I love them. And Chris and I were texting, and he's like, Chris, you have to talk to the Wolfs. And I went, I've got to have the Wolfs on the show. And so here we are today. I'm just so thankful.
That.
Yeah, thank you both. I really enjoyed our time today. I really have.
Us too, Chris. Thank you.
I love to hear that full circle moment. That's cool.
It's my honor. Anything else you want to share before we end the conversation today?
Anything else? Excuse me, I'm coughing.
You're all right.
Goodness, big question.
I mean, I don't know how you do with the show notes and things. This is more like practical, but just, people can continue to connect with more information about our story, our camp, our new book at hopeheals.com.
Perfect.
And,
perfect.
At Hope Heals on Instagram is our main kind of social outlet. So we love, again, the digital age is powerful, especially for folks for whom the physical world is not as made for. So we're grateful for that way to connect.
Again, thank you both. Folks, the book is Suffer Strong. You're watching on YouTube right now. You're listening on the podcast. Go grab a copy of this book. If you or someone you love just going through life and you're wondering, how do I take the next step? I really believe this book is the answer to that. Katherine and Jay Wolf, love you both. I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to just chat with you. I really admire you. I know the Lord's hand is on your life, so I'm very thankful.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's a blessing to have chatted.
You're welcome.